Hello, everybody. This is Timothy Halloran, and today we're talking about sexuality, eroticism, the influence of culture, porn, and taboo. So this is a smorgasbord of things that we're going to be talking about. Mostly sexuality as it's treated by culture throughout time, and sort of distinguishing the nature of sexuality from the cultural influences. So first of all, I want to send out the message that this is largely coming from my own personal observations. I have no credentials, and so take everything that I say with a grain of salt. I do not have understanding of everything, and so I'm just putting this stuff out there largely because, when we talk about some of the more complicated issues in porn and sexual fetishes, I do not see very much information out there at all. And so this is sort of a new frontier, even though it's not really new. We'll talk about the dynamics and how this stuff is forming. And I'm going to try to blow through most of the slides as fast as I can. Particularly the first dozen slides are going to be just sort of opening up, talking about how some of the signs correlate with sexuality and how sexuality has progressed throughout time. And then towards the end, I would love to hear any questions from you guys and see if we can investigate into this area. So let's see if I can get this screen shared. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead. First of all, let's start with what is sex. Sex is nature. I cannot distinguish the two. The sexual solar function is what allows for material creation and reproduction to exist. And so sexuality is inherently a dual function. It is a mechanism of nature which allows us to experience growth and evolution, and it happens through a mechanism of union and separation. Okay, so union is the merging with the other, with a symbol or an archetype, because of course sexuality doesn't just have to be physical sexuality, and separation is the individualization function. And so sex is union and procreation is separation, inherent in nature. Now, sexuality, erotic nature has always been there. When you look into the past, 25,000 years is what the Venus of Willendorf dates back to. The first sex object, arguably, and also interestingly, it is a depiction of exaggerated beauty or a depiction of the ideal. And so this depiction of an eroticized ideal is not something that is new. This is as ancient as far as we know humanity is. Kama Sutra, the ancient sex manual of Hinduism, this image we see at the bottom, it's on a Hindu temple. And so sexual eroticism has been around forever. And the Kama Sutra is interesting because it can sort of be said to be the first sexual standard that's been sort of provided by culture. And obviously, when the Kama Sutra was circulated, there was not as much taboo as there is currently or has been through the last 1,000 years in the sub-age of Virgo. So another example of this is Pompeii. This is where we have some of our largest amounts of erotic art coming from the lost city of Pompeii. And so obviously, what shall we say, friskiness, playfulness, eroticism, this is nothing new. This is inherent in humanity, and it's been changed throughout time. And so we can start to look at this by starting to look at the ages and how the history of sexuality has changed. In the age of Taurus, we look to the Egyptian culture and we see Atum, the first god, creates the whole creation through divine act of masturbation, Taurus. Okay, so this was sacred masturbation. It was ceremonially repeated by the pharaoh. The ancient Greeks similarly had a relaxed view of masturbation. It was a way of releasing built-up tension. However, once we start to progress into the age of Aries in the Roman era, we start to see these standards change. Masturbation is now regarded as a lowly act, suited for slaves who couldn't have sex with slaves or people themselves. And also fellatio was regarded as acceptable by the Greeks, but despised by the Romans. They considered it something that gave you bad breath, and in the Roman paradigm, you greeted one another through a kiss. And so fellatio was considered something negative. Now, in the age of Pisces, and particularly the Virgo sub-age, we see the birth of the Puritan movement, which we are still transitioning through, really. And so this is very relevant as to why we see so many of the practices, the sexual fetishes, cultural behavior patterns that we see. And so as Christianity gains popularity, so do many of its beliefs, such as anti-abortion, anti-birth control. And so pagan traditions are seen as barbaric. Old pagan sexual traditions are considered barbaric. Celibacy is encouraged as a sacred practice as the rise of the Catholic Church continues to grow through the medieval ages. And sexuality itself is, of course, considered a sin with the popularity of the Garden of Eden myth. And we have this idea of original sin happening through lust. Adam and Eve are considered, primal for their nakedness, and it's considered a problem. And so we're seeing the birth of demons that have to do with lust and the flesh gaining popularity, and much, much fear around these stories taking place the last couple thousand years. And so into the sub-age of Virgo, about 1,000 years ago, medieval ages, we see the birth of self-flagellation. This is basically masochism in a endeavor of penance for original sin, trying to redeem ourselves for the dirtiness and the impurities within ourselves through masochism, punishing ourselves. And so from this Puritan movement, we see the birth of all sorts of anti-masturbation material that is going on even just a couple centuries ago. At the start of the 20th century, John Kellogg initiates a zealous campaign against masturbation. This includes the invention of Kellogg's cornflakes, which was advertised as an anti-masturbation food, as well as graham crackers, anti-lust diet. We see the invention of machines such as the anti-masturbation machine that will send an electrical shock to your penis if you have any kind of erection throughout the night. And of course, we see on the left the Victorian era model to cure nocturnal emission. And so not only is masturbation, but nocturnal emission considered a problem just a century ago. And this continues up till just a few decades ago. It is not until the 1950s and the 1960s that health professionals and organizations are officially starting to consider masturbation healthy and normal. And this is happening alongside the sexual revolution of the 1960s. And so this stuff is just beginning to change now. And we will talk about how it's very interesting being on this sort of crux between ages and between periods. There's so much unresolved sexual stuff that is sort of all shoved into this black hole that we'll talk about. And that's where sexual fetishes and pornography and the cultural practices are really coming from, is that congestion of all of these things together. So how do we discern these things? And let me see if I can, okay, so questions. If sexual moral and practice has changed so drastically throughout time, even recently, question is, do we even really understand sexuality presently? Since sex is natural, and yet the perspective and treatment of it through time, how can we distinguish the nature of sexuality from the cultural perspective, which is changing and evolving through time? How can we expect this perspective to continue to change? And so again, we're looking at the ages, age of Pisces, the sub-age of Virgo, and also the positions of Pluto's nodes. Now this obviously paints some of the broadest and biggest movements and changes throughout collective evolution, and sexuality itself is such a broad and huge, somewhat fundamental creative force. We are seeing these themes almost joint at the hip with our own behavior and treatment of sexuality. And so, how can we discern the nature of sex from the cultural appreciation of it? Is the cultural position is shown from the ages, the positions of Pluto, etc. The nature of sexuality is found within the zodiac. The zodiac itself, if we think of it as its high octave inherent nature, is just nature. And yes, our understanding of the zodiac signs changes as we learn about them throughout time, but that nature fundamentally stays the same. And so the nature of sexuality we will see largely played out in the fixed cross in the zodiac. And that's because the fixed cross is where that solar creative energy becomes fixed, becomes encapsulated. And so just to quickly quote Dane Rudyard, he's basically just explaining in this quote, I'm not going to read the whole thing, that the fixed signs is what takes the solstice, equinox, initiating energy of the cardinal signs and fixes these elements into a form which expresses personal character, the character of culture, religion, or the communal way of life. So it reflects the individual treatment of creative sexual energy as well as the collective cultural treatment gets stored in and fixated via these signs, which can be tremendously powerful and useful as much as it can also be tremendously detrimental, and we become frozen and stuck in those fixed signs. And so I'm just going to briefly explain how these fixed signs correlate to the sexuality, and then we'll talk about how it's working with culture and time. So Taurus, sensuality. This is masturbation, which is self-pleasuring. This can also be a function of abundance, building up sexual energy rather than releasing it, which is the Scorpio polarity. So self-comforting, relaxation, sensual and erotic clothing and makeup is also part of the Taurus function. That became considerably degraded through the age of Aries, which followed the age of Taurus. So when we read ancient texts such as the Old Testament, and I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because there's so much wisdom and truth in such texts. However, it's also showing the culture of the time following the age of Taurus, putting down the Babylonian, the Egyptian, sensual, religious practices of that time. And so we see the story of Jezebel, the Babylon queen who wore makeup, the painted face, and she is basically demonized in the Old Testament. So Taurus is actually, its inherent nature is self-provision and self-empowerment through using objects as well as material, tactile things. Taurus is things that can be used for self-empowerment. Now, in contemporary time, we see the Taurus collecting and storing of pornography, which is somewhat of a frog in a well peep show type of process itself, voyeurism, looking from a distance, and it is this focus on parts can be the Taurus function, is the compartmentalizing of various parts and things, again, the fetishizing of tactile, material, clothing and sensations, and then of course, erotic oils, incenses, music is all Taurus. The polarity is Scorpio. Now this is obviously sex at its most blatant and obvious. So this is merging of duality. It is the meeting of all dual things, including the sacred and the profane. This is mysterious how these things merge. This is Scorpio. There is that instinctual drive for union. And this union may not necessarily be simply union with another physical person. It can be union with a symbol or an empowered tool. And so with Scorpio being the opposite of Taurus, which is peacefulness, openness, yourself, and self-empowerment, Scorpio is like the fusion reactor. And so we get sexual drama, we get entanglements, we get multiple people, multiple places, and all of this complication becomes congested through the function of Scorpio. And so this gets played out through contemporary fetishes such as bondage, constriction, domination, suffocation. There is that feeling of congestion that people are attracted to, as well as power symbols such as death, blood, or even rape. We're dealing with themes of dominance and submission here. And that theme of dominance and submission gets thoroughly turned up during the age of Pisces, sub-age of Virgo, because age of Pisces, we're dealing with themes of ultimate surrender. And so these themes become sort of melted and complicated and stuck to the sexual nature. Okay, so we're also talking about death, birth, sex uses the same door, which is why we can see these things get so congested. We will talk about how sexual fetishes can be prior life death or sexual trauma that is being worked through in this life. So through the Taurus-Scorpio polarity, we get the word fetish. And what the word fetish really means is taking an object and empowering it. Yes, supernatural powers, man-made object that has this type of power. Now, in contemporary modern day words, when we think of the word fetish, it's almost always associated with sexual fetishing. And so this is the empowerment of particular parts of the woman, breast, leg, butt, the sexualization of certain fabrics, leather, satin, silk, latex. And again, there is the theme of the mashing together of the sacred and the profane being explored in contemporary sexual fetishes. Now, sexual stimulation has the power to override what might have been typically considered gross or profane when there is not sexual arousal. That is a very powerful function that can be used productively or against us, because when sexual arousal is combined with something that's gross or profane, it means that we can get stuck there, or we can transmute and transform those areas. That is going to largely depend on the creation of safe space, the Taurus polarity, in order for such things to be moved through in a way that's not inherently harmful. Okay, Leo is the creative, spontaneous solar function. So of course, so much sexual energy comes out of the fixed sign of Leo. And this is basking, this is celebration, this is playfulness, this is release. I put the Moulin Rouge there. This is a perfect example of that type of colorful, bright, glittery, shiny, celebrating, costume party, and sexuality all being fused together. This is cabaret, this is exhibitionism, and there is a sort of glamour and regality there. And that is sort of being shown through the so-called celebrity status of the porn star. And also we see sexual narcissism is, a quality of the porn star usually that we see through the function of Leo. The opposite sign is Aquarius. Aquarius is huge in this area because Aquarius is liberation. Liberation from culturally defined or socially imposed roles or prescriptions. In Aquarius, we see the breaking of rules, the breaking of taboos in certain respects, and this can be gender bending, this can be androgyny, and I think those are some of the positive potentials of Aquarius, whereas the negative potential we're certainly experiencing at this time, which is sexual objectification, of course, the objectification of women, making the woman body an object rather than a personality, and also the synthetic compartmentalization of the sexual parts, attractions, etc. We're really seeing this growing, and it's a problem. We're seeing this particularly in countries such as Japan, where there is a decreasing population because people are not interested in monogamous relationships anymore. People are not interested in having a family or procreation because there is the notion that having technology that can feed your sexual appetite is liberating from the limitations of relationship or having a family. That is sort of the consensus belief that's going over there in those places. And technology and the internet is filling in for real people. And so we're seeing sex robots, sex toys and all of these things being blown up. It's a huge, huge market. And so Aquarius is also sex cults, groups, or tribes that form around particular fetishes or boundary pushing experiences. So there's communities for particular fetishes, communities for people who like to do boundary pushing things. For example, people who like to have fish hooks in their back and hang, there's an exhilaration that comes from that. Well, there's a whole tribe and community of people who like to do that. So Aquarius is all about sexual experimentation, which can lead to positive things. But again, the danger of the fixed signs is always going to be getting stuck and not actually evolving or learning or growing or even getting what it is that is inherently desired. And that is the main issue with Aquarius, is this type of disembodiment, coming away from the body, the senses, and sort of in an objective mental perspective, getting addicted to synthetic forms of what it is that we really want, which does not actually quench our thirst, and then that addiction becomes fixated. So in the Leo Aquarius polarity, we see role play, which is a means of experimentation in roles outside the typical or culturally assigned, which can be liberating. And specific roles may be consciously or not sexually desired, which can potentially be connected to past trauma, so we can experience the flip side of a role, move through guilt, fear, unresolved issues. This is just an idea that there may be unconscious, natural coping mechanisms that attract our awareness to fractured or wounded areas within our own consciousness by surrounding such areas with sexual energy like a cocoon, attracting us to those areas so that healing awareness can be brought there, while the protection of the sexual energy is not allowing for the re-traumatization to happen, but rather healing to happen. Now, that sounds very nice, but when we look out into the world and we see role play and we see BDSM and these things, how they are depicted in culture, we don't usually see that intention or that consciousness or that awareness. And so this can be negative in there being sexual energy attracting us to a particular area and then nothing getting resolved. Again, just getting stuck there. Okay? And so again, what is really needed is loving intention and safe space in order to bring healing awareness to such places where fragmentation has occurred. For example, someone who has suffered from sexual trauma can heal their trauma through sexuality, a very gentle, safe, nurturing type of sexuality. However, whenever experimenting in role play or any of these various, experimentation, there is the potential for re-traumatization, which is basically when all of this unresolved, unfixed, largely unconscious, and potentially fragmented and wounded stuff all gets ripped open and it all bleeds up to the surface, and then it all has to be worked through, and this is re-traumatization. And so there's a possibility for healing, there's a possibility to be re-traumatized whenever you're dealing with some of these deeper, more complex areas. Now, porn is going to be really huge to talk about because this is a huge jet fuel that is basically propelling, empowering the whole of cultural sexuality at this time. And this is a recent thing. Porn wasn't really invented. It was introduced by the Pluto-Leo generation. And so, and the Pluto was in Leo, beginning and ending with the moon's north node in Scorpio. And so there were 3 times while Pluto was in Leo that the moon's nodes were on the Scorpio-Taurus cusp, or Taurus polarity. And we see the birth of pornography. Now 12% of the internet is porn. 25% of all internet searches are related to porn. 28% of porn viewers are women. And according to the National Coalition for the Protection of Children and Families, 47% of families have reported that there is a problem with porn in their home. So the question is, since porn is such a central focus, which again, this is our collective consciousness getting stuck in the fixed signs, is that really a safe space in order to explore the real significance of why these sexual fetishes exist, why these desires, why this guilt, why this attraction? And the likely answer is no. And so really, really quickly, I just want to explain what is sort of going on with this porn and this attraction anyways. And so looking at fixed patterns, stimulus releasers. Okay, here's the example of the herring gull. It has a red spot on his beak, or on her beak. I believe it's the mother. Her chicks are attracted to peck at that red spot, which triggers the mother regurgitating her food, feeding the chicks. However, when scientists put a red dot on any object, those chicks are going to peck at that red dot, even though it's not their authentic mother's beak. And so what scientists have discovered, and what I'm going to say is, scientists have discovered that man-made models sometimes work as better stimuli than those found in nature. So for example, plovers will incubate painted black models of eggs rather than their natural light brown eggs, because they prefer the painted black eggs. Rats prefer to press a lever and look through a window at fake rats with painted features rather than looking at real rats. And so I put the strawberry and the chocolate covered strawberry down there as, as a sort of silly example is, what are you more attracted to? There is fruit, which we were naturally attracted to since the beginning of time. And then there is cake, which is like a synthetic, turn the dial up version of it. Now I want to be careful because obviously I'm comparing birds and human beings. And so I feel like a trained psychologist might get angry at me for making this comparison. But nonetheless, this is sort of fundamentally illustrating what's going on with porn, where people are being attracted to synthetic versions of the natural thing because it is actually preferred. It causes that trigger and that stimulus to go off even more so than before. And so it's not until the last several years that we see any studies on pornography coming out. 2009, a study on porn is abandoned because they can't find a control group. They can't find any young men in their early 20s who have not looked at porn. It is a universal situation. What they did discover is most boys seek out pornographic material by the age of 10, but are disinterested at that age. Now, I think that's an understatement. I think most boys are attracted to porn by the age of 10. They seek it out, they find it, and they are traumatized by what they see, either consciously or unconsciously. And so this is our cultural experience of sexuality at this time. It's important to note that pornography basically is sexual education at this time. I mean, what is taught in Catholic schools via nuns and public schools is not real sexual education. And so what they found is that as adults, these same boys will continue to look at porn, which is particular, it's compartmentalized, they have their favorite types, and they will watch it privately, not as a couple. 2014 Cambridge study on porn's effect on young men. This is 3 years old. What they found is that porn mentally conditions the brain in the same type of hardwiring of neural pathways as does drug addiction. It's the same exact fundamental brain chemistry happening as a drug entering the brain. And so porn addicts crave and need porn rather than enjoy it. Over 50% of compulsive porn users struggle with erectile dysfunction with their real partners. And this is a high rate that continues to grow, particularly in young men. The younger the viewer of porn, the more conditioned the reward center becomes hijacked by that forming of the fixed neural pathways. The major brain changes that happens is sensitization, desensitization, and hypofrontality. Sensitization is going to happen to particular cues, whatever particular synthetic fetish or cue or particular type of porn the man likes. He sensitizes his brain to that particular route and then needs that. But that type of sensitization, again, it can, it leads to that particular synthetic, usually visual mental stimuli is what is sensitized, whereas desensitization to what is natural, the partner, the natural human body is desensitized. Hypofrontality is the disconnect of blood moving to the front of the brain. And that is an issue that is in bipolar, schizophrenic, and ADHD patients. And we're going to see that this type of stimuli activating is going to be very unhealthy for anybody, but particularly people who already have those conditions. And so, long story short, we're seeing the Virgo subage, the Pisces age, the patriarchy, the south node of Pluto, it's all being sort of congested and stuck via the fixed signs. And we're seeing that again largely playing out through pornography at this time. What are the cultural themes and patterns? Well, in the Virgo subage, we see themes of submission, humiliation. Non-mutual, but rather one serving the other type of sex is all of the porn you're going to see online. Degradation of women is the consensus, as well as the taboo of the degradation of women. Oh, that's bad, but we're attracted to it because it's considered taboo, because we're coming out of the Victorian age, which turned up the dial of taboo. When the dial of taboo turned up towards basically all sexuality, it caused suppression, the growth of unconscious shadows, and now we're seeing all of this explode, typically through behind the scenes hidden areas. Again, this is why we see 12% of the internet is porn, but nobody talks about it, ever. Nobody talks about it. It's amazing. It's because we have not gotten there yet. We're too afraid, we're too ashamed, we're too full of guilt still, coming from the subage of Virgo, and it's all unresolved. And so there is the eroticization of themes related to the Virgo subage. Public humiliation, torture devices, stocks, focus on the young, innocent, helpless woman caricature. Here's an amazing thing. What are the most common sex costumes? The most common one is the maid, the nurse, the nun. What archetype are we seeing here that is being attracted because there is taboo and unresolved energy surrounding this archetype? And so we see themes revolving punishment, about being bad, dirty, naughty. Again, the Garden of Eden theme of original sin, original impurity, punishment as a result. Pluto's North Node in Cancer themes related to the disconnect and idealization of the mother archetype is extremely common and is underlying so many of the things that we see in sexuality, including what is often apparently a distortion of natural sexuality, is coming from a disconnect from the mother archetype. And so we're seeing the desire to return to the womb or childhood, rejection of masculinity, fetishizing of women being in powerful positions, almost going back to this unconscious attraction to the previous matriarchal age. So again, all of these themes we're seeing unconsciously resurfacing through the cultural practice and celebration of sexuality. So how do we approach sexuality then? Let's say you have a client who has a sexual fetish or something along these lines. First of all, someone who's aware and conscious and has a sexual fetish, they're going to spend their entire life asking why. And a lot of times, the vast majority of people will never know why. Most people just learn to accept it. Why am I attracted to socks or feet or something? Sexual fetishes can go ridiculous. I was reading about somebody who is sexually attracted to seeing a woman slice up cheese. Your interpretation of that is just as good as mine. I think it's like dream interpretation sometimes, where it's so surreal and so far out. Yet there has to be something there that is causing these things. There has to be a why. And so in order to approach these things, first of all, it never should be seen as a distortion, a problem, an issue, or a mistake, because that's going to wound the client or the person that you're working with, who is probably very sensitive about this part of themselves. And if anything, it took a lot of courage to open up about such things. And so it's never about, with any addiction, not just this stuff, about forcing a fix and end any of these behaviors or patterns. Because what that is going to do is reinforce the cycle of taboo, guilt, and atonement. The subage of Virgo. The more we gotta fix something that's impure with us, the more this is unhealthy, the more this is bad, the more taboo we're giving to it, which is giving it power. And that's going to attract the person back there. So it can't be forceful. We're coming out of the South Pluto node in Capricorn. The forceful patriarchal way does not work for resolving these things. Instead, this sexual nature has to unfold with care and attention. And questions can be asked in terms of how do we find the root of this? And the question is, what is truly being sought? Emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Most of the sexual attractions we're seeing in this patriarchal age, as we're moving into the age of Aquarius, very objective and technology driven, is mental conceptual programming. And nobody is thinking of the physical sensual Taurus or the the celebratory connection to the inner child of Leo, or the empowerment, catalyzing change of Scorpio, or the liberation of Aquarius. It's just attraction. Let's do this. It's just that patriarchal, nonsensical desire. So the questions are, what is emotionally being sought? What is spiritually being sought? And by seeking out those questions, a gentle turnaround can happen by redirecting harmful behaviors or unnatural obsessions that get in the way of normal functioning, by connecting those things, connecting the dots between the disoriented goals and the healthy ones. What's underneath that disoriented obsession that is wanting to be, union or merge into or achieve, that is not happening because of the unnatural mental or obsessional distortion of it. This is about separating desires. Jeffrey Green correlated the fixed cross with Lucifer and separating desires. And, how do you handle separating desires? What if you have a separating desire and you're a conscious and spiritual and aware person? Is somebody saying, oh, well, that's bad, you need to get rid of that, that's going to destroy your hope of spirituality? Is any of that going to help? No. It has to be explored. It has to unfold through the creation of safe space, trying to figure out the why. And so exploration of these things, an example of this would be, say a man has a desire to have sex with a stranger. Okay, maybe it's not always the most unhealthy or destructive desire, but in this case, the person has a monogamous partner, and that's very destructive and very hurtful. How can this be explored? What are creative solutions that are going to be healthy and non-destructive? Is the creation of safe space, so those separating desires can be explored and experimented with and can unfold naturally and somewhat be exhausted in a safe space with a loving partner, etc. Those are the ways to help move through these things. But again, that requires a lot of openness. It requires a lot of communication. It requires a lot of taking these things out of the murky, suppressed nether regions of our own unconsciousness and starting to really talk and share about these things. That way we can understand that this is actually a natural part of our own consciousness that is functioning as it should. So that way we can continue to work through these issues and really heal ourselves individually and as a collective. So I'm not sure how long I've been talking, but I would love to know if any of you have any questions about anything that we've said so far.
Tim, you have about half an hour if you wish to use that up.
Okay, that's awesome. And so, I'd love to hear from some people and to see if there's a conversation that happens or not. And we'll just see what happens.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you thinking that we can find the keys for helping somebody through this type of thing by looking at their personal fixed portions of their chart? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. If you see someone who has a significant amount of stuff on the fixed, square, it is certainly a possibility. I mean, I will use myself as an example. This is part of my own healing process of sharing this stuff. I have Pluto and Scorpio opposite the moon in Taurus, square to my moon's nodes, south node in Leo, north node in Aquarius. And this has been a huge theme in my life. I had sexual fetishes since the age of 5. And have always wanted to get to the bottom and understand why, and felt cursed and condemned and there was something wrong with me, etc. And so I believe it's just my own intuition or notion. I do not know that this is past life unresolved material that I'm trying to heal through myself. And early on in life, I was brought into a family that was basically, sexuality is bad. It was the whole Garden of Eden myth again. And that is a huge part of what created the sexual fetish in the first place, is the taboo of it. And so absolutely, you can look at those fixed, energies in somebody's chart. And then again, it's about taking it back to the nature of those fixed signs. So what is the inherent nature of Taurus? Taurus is still somewhat of a berated sign culturally, You're lazy, you're sensual, etc. And we've got to learn how to celebrate the natural parts of each of these signs. And people who have these fetishes or these obsessions, I'm going to say, the majority of the time something got in the way of them being able to get into the actual nature of what's there. And so obviously the hugest dynamic that's underneath all of this is the fact that we've lived in thousands of years of patriarchy, because particularly men are so disconnected from their own inner feminine that it sexualizes the feminine essence. Men aren't allowed to be soft or feminine in themselves. And so we hypersexualize femininity because that's what we're trying to get. And so then sexual obsession is coming from the fact that we're disconnected from that feminine in ourselves. And so we're trying to merge with it outside of ourselves via the Scorpio function. Does that make sense?
I totally agree.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's not just in men, it is in men and women. Again, 28% of women view porn now, and I think that's going to be something that continues. And so it is very interesting. You know, obviously there are other zodiac signs that correlate with sexuality as well. You know, you've got Aries, and, you know, and so again, it's really looking at how is the inherent nature of these zodiac signs being played out through our culture and the time we live in, etc. And religion has been a huge part of that in the age of Pisces.
I really appreciate you bringing that forward. Very insightful. Thank you.
Timothy, that was a really good talk. I have a lot of clients and friends of my daughter who has Pluto in Scorpio. So I've been counseling this group of people and studying them for my own edification. And because I'm so much older than you are, as Pluto was entering Scorpio, my friends were dying of AIDS. And we were watching this whole sexual revolution that Pluto and Libra kind of did through relationship come to a head with sexual diseases now becoming something that was part of the world that brought all this awareness and stopped the sexual revolution basically in its tracks. So it was fascinating to watch that, and I always wondered what it was going to be like for the people who were born with it. And I remember reading Jeffrey saying that the souls that have Pluto and Scorpio are very, very pure because of the intensity of having Pluto in its own sign. And I've noticed that I don't know about purity because I'm not sure how to really judge purity, you know, I don't know what that means, but I certainly know that they're intense and they're true. And you really, they don't lie much, you know, they understand not to do that. So anyway, I loved your talk.
Thank you. Yeah, that is interesting that Jeffrey said that. I would say that the Pluto Scorpio definition or generation is has been cleansed by fire through past lives and is continuing to be cleansed by fire and hopefully wrapping up that phase of our evolution in this life. And so again, the goal is Pluto polarity point in Taurus. And we come in, like in the talk I did on the Scorpio Pluto generation, we come into internet pornography. And again, the sooner you look at internet porn at a younger age, it becomes more conditioned in your brain. So we're the first generation to be really conditioned by the conglomeration of unresolved sexual stuff through porn. And we're the generation that can hopefully find some antithesis to that. Because what I've experienced in my generation is that most people don't even want to admit that that's been the case and that we are that sort of congested and, you know, it's complicated. And natural sexuality is, I don't think it's something that most of us really ever got exposed to very much.
Hi, Timothy. I had a question on, and I'm not really sure how to word it. As far as this, and it's going to be a sensitive subject, children and the parents wanting to have sex with their children, and the ownership I see from, you know, Leo, Taurus, and of course linked with the Pluto.
Okay, so is this This is about child molestation and pornography you're asking about?
Yes.
I'm really glad.
And even sexual abuse within the families. I guess that's probably the biggest where I'm trying to link it to, looking at, especially with the Pluto nodes in Cancer and Capricorn. I'm seeing that link. So.
Yeah, certainly it's a result of patriarchy. I mean, do we even know what sexuality looks like in a non-patriarchal age? Chances, I mean, we don't really. The matriarchal age, sexuality was probably treated so differently, it's completely foreign to us at this place. And Jeffrey gives us an idea of how that was by saying there was no nuclear families in the first place. There was children being raised communally. And so I imagine sexuality was unimaginably different than how we regard it today. Now, I'm really glad you brought up the point of child molestation and child porn, because I think that is certainly a result of patriarchy. And what we're seeing is the wounded child. This is the theme, the wounded child. The child is wounded because the child's been disconnected from the nurturing energy of the mother. So the child lives in a terrifying, apocalyptic, fight to survive, dog eat dog world, is the patriarchal ages that we're all coming out of largely. And this is where all of our healing is happening. And Jeffrey Green even said that all souls have been wounded by the patriarchy because it has gone on for so long and goes so deep. And so with child molestation and child pornography, we're seeing symbolically and apparently the final stages of that disconnect of the child or the man from the mother and femininity. And I think the relationship between masculinity and femininity is much more like son to mother than our current world and culture ever recognizes. And so, long story short, who are the only people who are capable of child molestation and looking at child pornography are themselves extraordinarily wounded children who are continuing the pattern of karma. Now, I'm really glad you brought that up too, because one thing that is encouraging the growth of that type of sexual distortion is pornography and taboo. And what pornography does to the brain encourages the viewer of porn to seek out more and more taboo material to look at. The reason that happens is because of the disconnect from actual healthy sexuality. So for example, any one of these fetishes, whether it be cross-dressing to, gender swapping, to wearing particular clothes, or, the worshiping of feet, all of this stuff goes through the Virgo age and humiliation. And there's something natural within all of these things. Someone who wants to be in the role of a woman is someone who's trying to connect with that feminine energy in themselves. This is what Carl Jung says. A man who is cross-dressing is trying to connect with their inner anima. And that type of experimentation is really, if it's done consciously, a healthy way to do that, to explore the other role and to integrate that energy. And what he says is through that conscious practice, the cross-dressing, it runs out of steam. It's not needed once the anima is integrated. And so similarly, a lot of these fetishes and these sexual obsessions and mental obsessions are trying to get at something. But pornography prevents us from actually getting it because it is a discombobulated, disembodied, objective, mental, seeing what you want from a great distance, but never actually getting there. And then typically masturbating to orgasm in an unnatural way. And so the brain gets addicted to those visual, mental, conceptual patterns. But because it's not getting fed the actual nature, the sustenance that the person is yearning for, they're not getting. And yet the addiction happens. And in order for those brain synapses to keep releasing the dopamine, the feel-good pleasure drugs that the person is seeking through looking at porn, they have to increase the mental, conceptual excitement throughout time, because they're not actually getting Taurus sensuality, they're not getting the body, they're not getting Scorpio actual union. You know, there's no celebration of the inner child. It's pornography is like wounding the inner child, because again, it is just reaffirming to the person that there's a disconnect from the mother. There's no actual intimate merging. It's getting reinforced again and again and again every single time someone looks at porn. What I'm getting to is that mental conceptual programming, the dial has to get turned up. The taboo has to get turned up. So somebody who's originally looking at porn because they're attracted to a particular type of clothing, then the clothing doesn't do it for them anymore, so they got to start adding in different things that turns up the taboo. Because this is how taboo works. Taboo says, oh, that's bad and different. So that means that if it's happening, well, then that holds a lot of power and excitement. And this is how people get controlled by taboo. And so what is more taboo than child pornography? It's the most taboo thing. You know, it is the actual illustration of the wounded child, you know? And so, you know, child molestation, it can only be caused by a wounded child himself. I personally do not believe that there are evil sorcerer souls out there. I just don't. There are only souls that have been severely, severely disconnected and wounded. And those are the ones that are capable of doing such things. And so you can look at porn, dial up the dial, and keep adding on to that taboo until you end up in something like child pornography. That is an actual possibility because of the brain chemistry that is happening, and combined with the disconnect from authentic femininity. Does that make sense and answer your question in terms of what you were talking about with that?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
No problem. And so, you know, this is rape culture too. Again, severely wounded children are doing this. And what we need to see is more and more people willing to talk about these things. We need more and more men who have these propensities and these desires in themselves to be willing to admit it. That's the first step to curing these things. But because of the taboo, because it's so bad, it becomes a closeted thing. And then in the closet, it just festers and grows and develops. And this is a shadow that inevitably takes over and possesses the person. And this is pedophile priests. This is what's happening with pedophile priests as well.
Yes.
Yeah, Mariam, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Timothy. Thank you so much for that.
Hi, Mariam.
There was just so much great information, and this topic is, I think it's just really important, because I think there are just everyone who's actually born into the earth comes in with a wounding related to sexuality, because of that separation, you know, from source. I think it's very much related to you know, the things that our wounded sexuality. And I think that there are a lot of people, especially people of the like new age healing you know, crowd, that also have quite a lot of areas that they're not really even looking into to try to heal. Like, for example, I wanted to mention polyamory, and how a lot of people, now I'm not sure myself, you know, where this stands and what this means, and I'm still trying to investigate, but something inside me doesn't really sit well with the idea of polyamory. And a lot of new age people, you know, they praise or they support this idea because of, you know, the oneness, and I don't know, it's just some kind of distortion. I feel some kind of distortion there. And so there's so much wounding, even in the people that are out there, you know, talking about the oneness and talking about the you know, how we need to heal ourselves. And I think, yeah, like you said, education, and just identifying first, like if you are yourself attracted to porn, for example, just knowing that there's no shame in that first, trying to understand where it comes from is like you cannot heal anything without first having no shame attached to it. And so I wanted to ask you about the age of Aquarius, because you also identified Aquarius as being one of the fixed signs. Do you think that this will have a role to play in healing people's sexuality? And also a thing that came up, I mean, I have so many questions that came up, but I'm not going to ask all of them. But I also find that religion has somehow been integrated with shame related to sexuality. And I kind of feel like it's related to, because there's so much power in sexuality, in true sexuality, that it's kind of wanted to be suppressed so that people cannot identify with this healthy power that exists within them, that can actually, transform, help greatly in your own evolution, but it's so distorted. And also I wanted to ask you about the moon's nodes moving into Leo and Aquarius, if that might have some kind of potential for healing our own sexuality shadows. So those are some of the things that came up.
Sure. And what we don't get to, please feel free to email me too. Yeah, there's definitely an opportunity to deal with those themes and heal those things. And Jupiter is going to move into Scorpio in October this year as well. So certainly a lot of these things can come to light. I completely agree with you that vast majority of people don't have a total understanding or healthy sexuality because, again, we don't know. We're so far away from this age, where sexuality was something that was not suppressed and natural. So yeah, and sex and power are absolutely joined at the hip. Again, Jeffrey Green correlates the fixed signs also with Lucifer, which isn't really the devil. It's raw power, the capability to choose to do what you will with that raw power is what we're talking about here. So it can be incredibly healing. It can be incredibly destructive, what goes on in the fixed signs, because again, that's where the creative solar energy is being contained. I'm trying to remember what your question was in between that. What was it?
Well, polyamory.
Oh, it was. Yes, polyamory in the age of Aquarius. So, yeah, I think it's intuitive to think that the experimentation that's going on with polyamory right now, it is experimentation. It's new. There's something that's exciting about it. Sexuality is different for every person. I don't think there's with all of these things. There's no black or white. You can't go into, for example, someone has a BDSM fetish. You can't look at what you're seeing on the surface and be just like, oh, that's bad. You can never judge the surface, what's going on. There can be something healing that's going on in that area. And so with polyamory and these things, it can be similar, I think. Some people, it might be natural for them in their own inherent polyamoric, whatever the word would be, way of being, was suppressed through the age of Pisces and monogamy and all of that. And at the same time, because it was suppressed, it was made taboo. So there's something exciting about it, and then people overexcite it. And so that is happening in the New Age movement, absolutely. Is that, oh, this is the future, this is going to solve our problems. And well, probably not. It's an exploration, an experimentation. We will most likely see that grow significantly during the age of Aquarius. I don't know myself, but the last age of Aquarius was a tribal situation. I'm wondering if, in another 1,000 years, we set up something culturally where children can again be raised communally or something like that. So we may see all sorts of things happen during the age of Aquarius. The major theme is going to be the liberation from any type of restrictive role, such as, oh, you're a man, this is what you are, you're a woman, this is what you are. It's really going to be about breaking down those things. But it will come with its own set of problems as well. The sub-age will be in Leo. So we'll see how that plays out with sexuality. Yeah, it'll be very interesting, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Timothy. This is really amazing.
So Timothy,
thank you guys.
We have 5 minutes left. Would you like to take another question
Sure.
or
If
comment?
there's another one out there, yeah. And I want to thank you guys for holding the space so I can present this. And thanks for encouraging me to present this, Linda. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome.
You mean girls?
Gals. Yeah. Just keep correcting me. In another year or two, I might finally get it.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment that although everybody is wounded by the patriarchy and the distortions, I think we all, I think it is our birthright to be in touch with natural laws as well. Like for me, you know, I'm very much in touch with them, and that is my focus, and that is very healing. So just wanted to mention that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There is a beauty with getting the full spectrum of, you know, leaving behind this age of distortion and seeing the potential, and we get to experience the full spectrum, which allows us to appreciate and enjoy what natural laws and natural sexuality and all these things really are.
Yeah, and I think now that Pluto will be opposing its own North Node very soon, like next month, I think we're really seeing, you know, the distorted masculine. We're seeing the, you know, we're really seeing it now. I don't know about you guys, but I think we have to see it. We really have to see the truth of it. Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's why you have repeated that over and over in your presentation. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is a little ugly, and that's why I think it's important to remember that as much as it's apparently evil, reptilian type men, what we're really fundamentally dealing with is wounded children.
Right.
And that type of compassion and forgiveness is what is needed in order for the actual healing and transition to take place.
Absolutely.
That's going to be you guys, the mothers and the women, coming in and showing us men what's the real superior force in reality, which is compassion.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can get that from the men as well, because they have that within them as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's powerful. Women defying what cultural femininity looks like, and sensitive, vulnerable men redefining what masculinity looks like are huge spiritual warriors in this time.
You were saying before that men externalize the feminine in order to integrate that within them, but let's turn that around to women externalizing the male. What is the purpose of that, do you think?
Women externalizing the male.
Masculine.
So like being attracted to a powerful man.
Yeah, yeah.
So what was the question?
Well, you were saying before that men externalize the feminine in order to integrate that softness within them. So why would women externalize the male?
Fear from repeating the past and getting thrown in the slammer.
I think it's, Linda, it's the same thing, right? Women that don't want or are not empowered. I mean, look at what just happened in this country. So many women voted for a man who's, you know, known for being a misogynist.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I think,
seeing,
right? Because they're not really in their true masculine power.
yeah.
They're projecting it outward. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's a
we're seeing a lot of daddy issues, patriarchal
Right,
daddy
exactly.
issues. And, you know, I can't think of the name, but it's, you know, when you're attracted to your imprisoner because it's what you're used to. So, for example, we're attracted to the alpha male Roman emperor looking dude because it's comfortable and familiar to us.
Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome. Thank you. That's the word. That's the word for Donald. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Timothy, I just wanted to tell you, just to sort of lighten the mood a little bit. I will, thanks to you, I will never look at cornflakes and graham crackers the same way.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah. They also really propagated circumcision during that time as an anti-masturbation technique.
ouch. Okay, any final question?
Well, just a comment, I guess. I have fixed angles and I have a T-square in those, a grand cross in those fixed angles. I have 3 sons that were not circumcised.
Thank you. Yeah, they appreciate that. Sure.
Oh, Timothy, thank you so much for providing so much information on this, and it's all there in the slides, and we can go back and go through it. So any final comments?
I just want to say thanks to you guys. This has been incubating in me for a long, long time, and I had to wait for the right safe space to be able to share this. And so that's all thanks to you guys.
Excellent work.
It's an important subject, Timothy. People really need help with their sexuality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Counsel a lot of people who need, everybody needs help, everybody.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Lots of love. Thank you guys. Love you all.
Excellent.
Love you too. Bye.
Love you too.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody.